Dear audience and spectators, welcome to the channel again. Today we are talking about non-linear approach to narrative. We are talking about stream of consciousness and interior monologue in today's discussion. Stream of consciousness is the term applied to any attempt by a writer to represent the conscious and subconscious thoughts and impressions in the mind of a character. This technique takes the reader inside the narrating character's mind, where he or she sees the world of the story through the thoughts and senses of the focal character. Stream of consciousness is a narrative technique capturing the idiosyncratic and haphazard nature of human thought, characterizes the novels of Virginia Woolf and Irish author James Joyce, who both lived from 1882 to 1941. That was a coincidence. It is a narrative technique rendering the inward experience of a character. This technique is designed to give the impression of ever-changing series of thoughts, emotions, images, and memories in the spontaneous and seemingly illogical order that they occur in real life. The textbook example of stream of consciousness is the last section of James Joyce's Ulysses, which was published in 1922. Stream of consciousness as a term in literary criticism was coined by William James in Principles of Psychology to denote the flow of inner experiences of the character's mind. Now, it has become an indispensable term in literary criticism, and it refers to the technique which seeks to depict the multitudinous thoughts and feelings which pass through the mind. Another phrase for it is interior monologue. Virginia Woolf's masterpieces include Mrs. Dalloway, Orlando, and Jacob's Room, and her artistic sensibility is well summarized in the close of To the Lighthouse, 1927, when the artist Lily Briscoe realizes with quiet triumph, I have had my vision. A restrained yet joyful ode to the author's objective of capturing the artistic impulses inside her. Mrs. Dalloway, published in 1925, and To the Lighthouse, published in 1927, in 2 years' duration, experimental works of fiction in English literature where Virginia Woolf examines the human experiences of the time, the indefinability of character, and in an external circumstances as they impinge on consciousness. Joyce's short story collection, Dubliners, published in 1914, presents slices of Irish life, culminating in The Dead, a rich work probing Gabriel and Greta Cronies' marriage and ephemerality of love. Ulysses, published in 1922, it is a landmark in the history of literature, which has been regarded as the first novel to experiment stream of consciousness in full swing. It covers merely one day in Dublin, but Joyce gives his novel epic scope and complexity, plumbing through the illusions and interior monologues, the conflicting insights that constitute consciousness. The climax to this extraordinary work, 40-odd page interior monologue of Molly Bloom, a passage which has only one punctuation mark. The beginning of Joyce's portrait of the artist as a young man, it's his autobiographical novel, is an early indication of his interest in this technique. Since the 1920s, many writers have learned from Joyce and emulated him. Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, as mentioned earlier, in 1925, To the Lighthouse, 1927, William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, 1931, are two of the most distinguished developers of the stream of consciousness method in fiction. There have been hundreds of authors, and it has a long commonplace literary technique in fiction. Something resembling it is discernible in Lawrence Strawn's Tristram Shandy the Gentleman, published from 1760 to 1767, and self-long communing passages to be found in some 19th century novels, such as those of Dostoevsky's and other akin to interior monologue. After discussing about stream of consciousness, it's time to talk about interior monologue. Interior monologue is the technique of recording the continuum of impressions, thoughts, and impulses, either prompted by conscious experience or arising from the well of the subconscious. The phrase originates in an essay on James Joyce by Valerie Larbour, and is often regarded as synonymous with stream of consciousness. So it's the term that is synonymously used with stream of consciousness, and it was coined by Valerie Larbour, who wrote an essay on James Joyce. Joyce was the person or who invented this technique, or who applied this technique coined by William James in the work of fiction. Narrative technique. Interior monologue is a narrative technique in which characters' thoughts are revealed in a way that appears to be controlled by the author. This interior monologue typically aims to reveal the inner self of a character. It portrays emotional experiences as they occur at conscious and unconscious level. Images are often used to represent sensations or emotions. At the beginning of the 20th century, some authors, notably James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and William Faulkner, developed a stream of consciousness technique called interior monologue. So this stream of consciousness technique is called interior monologue, and they are commonly used together. The term is borrowed from drama, where monologue refers to the part in a play where an actor expresses his or her inner thoughts aloud to the audience. In fiction, an interior monologue is a record of the character's thoughts and sense impressions. As people do not think in complete, well-formed logical sentence, Joyce, Woolf, and Faulkner abandoned traditional syntax, punctuation, and logical connections in order to represent the flow of a character's thoughts. For example, in Joyce's Ulysses, published in 1922, the reader finds himself or herself with a transcript of one of the character's thoughts which contains no commas, full stops, or capital letters. The start disjointed and often illogical nature of interior monologue makes it a challenge for the reader to interpret. There is, however, some dispute as to which of the two is the larger term. Some critics argue that stream of consciousness includes all imitations of interiority. According to this view, the interior monologue is one method among many. To other critics, interior monologue is a larger category and stands for all methods of self-revelation, including, for instance, some kinds of dramatic monologue. According to this view, stream of consciousness refers to an uninterrupted flow in which logic, conventional syntax, and even at times punctuations are abandoned. One of the best-known interior monologues in English is Molly Bloom section at the close of James Joyce's Ulysses. The interior monologue is also common in the works of Virginia Woolf, as mentioned earlier, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse. The interior monologue is a narrative technique that exhibits the thoughts passing through the minds of the protagonist. These ideas may be either loosely related impressions approaching free association or more rationally structured sequences of thoughts and emotion. Interior monologue encompasses several forms, including Dramatize inner conflict, self-analysis, imagine dialogue as in T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock that was published in 1915. Rationalization. It may be a direct first-person expression apparently devoid of the author's selection and control, as in Molly Bloom's monologue concluding James Joyce's Ulysses, or third-person treatment that begins with a phrase such as he thought or his thoughts turn into. The term interior monologue is often used interchangeably with stream of consciousness. As mentioned earlier, as discussed in this section, the term interior monologue is often used interchangeably with stream of consciousness. They are used simultaneously, or they are used synonymously. But while an interior monologue may mirror all the half thoughts, impressions, and associations that impinge upon the character's consciousness, it may be restricted to an organized presentation closely related to the soliloquy and dramatic monologue. The interior monologue was first used extensively by Edward Jardine in Les Laurets Sont Corps, or published in 1887, Will to the Woods No More, and later became a characteristic device in 20th century psychological novels. So, we talked about stream of consciousness and interior monologue. These terms in fiction as a way of narrating. I think with this discussion, you got the point what we talked about today. If you have any queries, you can put in the comment box, and I should thank you very much for being with us.